And so I'm coming to this verse with a little bit of trepidation, similar to my prior message on the phrase, do not judge. See, many of us know this verse by another name, which is the Golden Rule. We may have been taught this rule by parents or teachers from our earliest days of childhood. It's a command that's as widely known and accepted as do not judge. However, just like the phrase do not judge, the phrase do unto others has been co-opted by popular culture. It's been twisted into something that's very different from what Jesus was trying to say initially. You and I should be fairly wary of people who quote Jesus to sound spiritual, and yet they do not live or think any differently than the rest of the world. I hope we can untwist his words this afternoon, and you can rest assured that the leaders of this church are trying our best to understand and communicate the real intent of Jesus well. And so this first section is called Love Yourself. Let me explain how our culture of selfishness makes Jesus' words something antithetical to almost everything he taught. And here's the fatal flaw. It is elevating the self as the standard for how we are treated by others. Basically, you elevate yourself to the position of God, and the self judges what is good for you and what is good for others. Here's an easy way of thinking about it. Let's say you've just eaten dinner, and you've had a salad, and the salad has some tofu in it, and you've succeeded thus far in trying to eat healthier. What's the follow-up question that we often ask, or at least the question that I always ask? It's this question: what's for dessert? And my mind thinks, I scream, you scream, we all scream for
ice cream.
That was more like a whisper. But yes, we all scream for ice cream. Is that the best thing to do? Not necessarily for my diet, but that is what I would do for myself, right? Is that the best thing to do? Not really. And see, that's a very easy and obvious example of why we are not really the right person to judge what is best for us. Our culture likes this word self-love, but the fact is that my self-love for myself is not really love. And my self-love isn't really healthy. And so the question you have to ask is, who defines how we should treat ourselves and others? We ourselves are not the ones who get to define the meaning of love. And honestly, that's probably a good thing. There's a quote by C.S. Lewis in Mere Christianity that kind of outlines this well, and it says that our passions, the things that we want, are not too strong, but rather they are too weak. We are like children, content to wallow with mud pies in the slum, because we have no idea what it means to be offered a holiday at the sea. And so what this quote talks about is how we as human beings often do not know what is good for us or even what is better than what we want. And I have discovered the truth of this statement in my own life. You know, I must admit that I am a poor lover of myself. If I am left to my own devices, I am prone to love in ways that are temporary, fleeting, comfortable, self-centered, or even self-destructive. Sometimes the result of this kind of thinking is a selfish use of the golden rule. We use it as an excuse for revenge. We mistreat others because we were discontent with how we were treated. And you may have heard an eye for an eye as the old rule that talks about that. If we only love others in the way we love ourselves, we will love poorly. We will be in sorry shape. And here's something that we have to really think about. Here's some context of Jesus' time. Jesus' golden rule was actually in opposition to another common phrase at their time. There was a religious leader named Hillel, and he would summarize the law and the prophets in this way. He said, "Do not do to your neighbor what is hateful to you." This is the whole Torah. The rest is commentary. Basically, Hillel is saying, just don't do bad things, and you will be okay. That's how many of us think in today's world. As long as I don't do anything bad, I can be a good person, and I can go to heaven. And if you read Jesus' command, whatever you wish that others would do to you, do also to them, it's kind of a flip in the emphasis, right? Notice that Jesus' command is more about action. Not don't do bad things, but do unto others what you would have them do unto you. Jesus is concerned about a much higher standard. Jesus is concerned about what we often call sins of omission. The sins of the things that we haven't done that we should do, or that is our responsibility to do. The things that we've been leaving out or neglecting. Just like do not judge, we see that God has a much higher standard than us. Jesus' standard is much higher than Hillel's, and it's much more active than Hillel's as well. Loving others is not just about not doing bad things to them. It's about how you live the rest of your life for others. Frankly, our world does the minimum to show love, whereas God demands the maximum. And in a selfish post-pandemic world, in a very individualist and consumerist world, this is our struggle. The mantra of many people today is, don't bother me. Mind your own business. I'm not bothering you, so why are you bothering me right now? What happens is, when we don't listen to Jesus' commandment, we instead listen to Hillel's commandment of just don't do wrong to others. We end up not investing in the things that matter. We don't invest in local communities like churches. Frankly, a lot of us are following Hillel's interpretation of the law and the prophets. Christians often want a message that allows us to be self-centered, and instead, we pay more attention to the unlimited catalogs of entertainment and social media. And this is a very isolated life where we might not be doing anything wrong, but you have to ask yourself, what are we omitting as Christians? What is the standard of love that you and I are forgetting or omitting? Not just the sins that we are committing or not committing, not just the things you can tally on a checklist, but the things that you should have done but didn't, right? And this is where Jesus is operating, and he's calling out the religious attitudes of their time and of our time too. And so we turn next to another passage that is often quoted separately from this one, but they have to be related because they're next to each other, and that is the passage about the narrow road. So this is the next section that we're going to look at today. We turn to the next few verses. You and I will see that Jesus did not waste words, and this next statement was included for a specific reason. It should modify or change how we see the golden rule. And you and I should always be careful to read the Bible in context. And so there are two roads, right? One road is wide and easy. And one road is narrow and hard. And the wide road is the one that leads to destruction. And most people go there. But the narrow one is the one that leads to life. I wish that the wide road was the one that led to salvation, but unfortunately, or fortunately, I should say, Jesus' way is the narrow one and the hard one. The Greek word for hard actually means to oppress, afflict, crush, and suffer. Whereas the words easy and wide refer to spacious or flat. And so, I don't know about you, but I would prefer the wide and easy road to a narrow and harsh one. The problem is that what looks comfortable and popular really leads to destruction. What Jesus is saying here is that following his command to do unto others is really difficult. And from my own experience, I've seen that loving others can feel like a narrow and hard road. Why? Well, you all may have experienced this. Firstly, there's no guarantee that if you do unto others, that they will do back unto you. Right? I'm sure that all of us have taken that risk and maybe regretted it to some degree, right? When you talk about doing unto others, you're not holding yourself to a selfish standard, you're holding yourself to God's standard. You're doing your responsibility to treat the other person just as God wants you to treat them. It's very easy in our world to follow the wide and the easy path. And it's easy to see why loving others in our world is a narrow path. Take my wife, Corinth, for example. Nurses love patients in a very narrow, in a very specific way. It has to be based on their lifestyle, their conditions, injuries, and maybe even their conscience. Imagine if a nurse were to love her patients however she wanted to. What would happen to the patient? How would the patient feel? The patient would be in for a rude awakening. That's probably not what the patient needs. The reason for hospital protocols is to make sure health professionals do what is best for the patient, not just for what the nurse thinks makes the most sense or what she would want in that situation. Of course, it would be easier for the nurse to use her own idea or standard of loving others, but that would make her ineffective or unloving. In the same way, if you and I only use our idea or standard of loving others, well, yeah, it would be easier, but then it wouldn't really be loving others. And you can see this in many other fields. For example, husbands and wives follow a narrow path because they commit to loving only each other. They have to say no to all the other options in the world. The point is that love, or prioritizing something, or caring for anything, necessitates a narrow approach. It is always specific, and it is always sacrificial. Jesus' narrow road is one of sacrificial love based on God's standard. Following Jesus means that you prioritize relationships with God and others rather than your own selfish standard of how you want to be loved and how you think you should be treated. And I think the whole Bible and the whole story of the Bible is really God just calling his people to recognize this, and they listen to varying degrees of success. And so I would like to close my sermon with this simple idea. I think this is how Christians are called to live and how Christians are called to change the world. It is very easy to want to change the world in a way that benefits me. It is easy to live in the world and just not do bad things. That is the wide and the easy road that a lot of people take, even a lot of Christians take. I'm not doing anything wrong, so I should be fine, right? But how did Jesus save us? We have to understand that Jesus did not save us by just not doing bad things, right? If Jesus just didn't do any bad things, we would still be without salvation. No, Jesus went above and beyond in his death and resurrection. Jesus took action, and Jesus was preemptive. The way Jesus wants us to change the world is through a different standard of love. It is a narrow road of learning how to love others, focusing your gifts and various resources, and sometimes even sacrificing your comfort and your pleasure. And so the question that we are left with today is, are you willing to do unto others? My hope is that you and I would be willing to go past just not doing bad things, like Hillel said. And instead, that we would love others with God's standard. Not with our standard, but with God's standard. And that's what it means to take the narrow road. And that's the road that, while it is hard, is also the road that leads us to